I am Alina Addison. I am an executive coach and founder of Adapter. At my Audacious Leaders Retreat, I had the impossible dream to publish a book. Only months later, I signed a book deal. This is my story. When my mum was pregnant with me, my parents went for a romantic dinner and had a night at the cinema watching a movie where the main character was an Italian movie. The main character was called Alina. So that's when they decided to name me, if I was going to be a girl, Alina. I was then born and my godparents gave me the name Dana. In Romania, we have two names. One is given by the godparents and one by the parents. My name was Alina Dana, but for some reason, when they registered at the registrar on my birth certificate, it was registered as Dana Alina. And life went on. I was always called Alina at home, and then I went to school at the age of 6. The first 2 weeks of me being in school, the teacher called me Dana, which I was totally unaware. I still remember those days when she was calling someone Dana, and I was looking around and thinking, who is this girl that never answers to the teacher's please? And only for my mum to be called to school about 2 or 3 weeks later and be told, Mrs. Chalk, your daughter is not paying attention in class. I constantly keep calling her Dana and she's not responding. To which my mum says, Dana, her name is not Dana, her name is Alina. And they had almost like a little argument, because in the communist Romania there was very rigid rules. The name was Dana Alina. That's what the registrar said, that's what my birth certificate said, and therefore the teacher just refused to accept that I was called Alina by my parents and by everybody else, and therefore she should call me Alina. Totally refused, and I was then known, I had to learn to respond to this new name Dana in school. So for the rest of my school years, I had almost like a parallel life where I was responding to the word Alina at home, and then I was responding to the word Dana at school. And I came to the UK 20 years later in my early 20s, and I just decided to claim my identity. Having been raised with two identities effectively, I suppose I learned to operate within these two parallel worlds, being able to know when I was called Alina and turn my head, or when I was called Dana and knowing I'm one and the same person under these two identities. It's probably helped me as a coping mechanism later on in life, when I effectively operated under these two identities. This corporate identity as a hugely driven, determined career person, and then at home being this caring mother that for most of my early career I hid away, having a son which was on the autism spectrum, hiding that I was a single mum, and just carrying on like nothing was wrong. Just the show must go on was one of my biggest mantras at the time. And looking back now, I realize that was really not sustainable. What I'm doing today is really teaching people to align themselves and not have these two identities, if you like, but really try to be one and the same person, if possible. And that was my biggest wish when I reclaimed my identity coming to the UK and wanting to be known as Alina and no longer as both Alina and Dana in these two different places, but being known as to the one person inside and out. When I was 5 and my sister was 2 at the time, We were in a boarding nursery, which was very normal for the communist Romania when I grew up. Most parents took their children to this boarding nurseries on a Monday morning and picked them up on a Saturday morning. Everybody was expected to hold a job and therefore take their children to these institutions. So I grew up in an institutions where I learned to conform. So conformity was a huge value of the system at the time. And in that system, conformity was also taken to extreme. And I so vividly remember this one moment. A few children, including my sister, who was the youngest of them all at the time, went to the toilet in the middle of the night, or about 10 of them, and they were caught by this really nasty teacher, Stink Matilda, okay? And she caught them and asked them to do exercises, physical exercises, which my sister refused to do at this tiny, tiny age of 2. And I was on the other side in the dormitory where we used to be 30 children, and I heard this huge bang on the wall. And for some reason at the time, I knew in that instant that it was my sister. Don't ask me how, I just knew it intuitively. And because she refused to do it, this woman just held onto her head and just banged it against the wall. She had a massive, massive bruise. And it was a whole case, and of course it was my sister's word against this teacher. I was on the other side, so there was no evidence. I heard it, I didn't know who it was. And it was the story, the official story was she fell in the garden. She fell in the playground. And it's really, really stuck in my mind, my heart at the time. And I believe that to this day, this is where I really got this huge responsibility, the sense of responsibility, the sense of advocacy for the underdog, for the people who had been hard done by. And years later, this is what I've done at work for what I call my women, for my children, and I still do that today, that real sense of protection, actually, responsibility and protection for the people who need that in their lives, like my sister did at the time. Am I a rebel? I grew up thinking of myself as the most conforming human being. In my family, I was the good girl. That's what, if you speak to my sister, she will say she was the rebel because she was the younger one. I was conforming, I was achieving, I was having the highest marks in school. I was even appointed the leader of the pack, the leader of the class at the very young age of 8 or 9. In communist Romania, again, you had an official leader of the class. And so it was the leader who had this emblem, the yellow one, which was the leader, and then there was a deputy leader which had red. So there had 3 different colors, and then there was the person who was sort of helping. And it was a symbol of status. So I had the yellow epaulette throughout my school years until I went to university. So my sister grew up with me being almost a role model, she would say, and she will retell the story that whatever she did, she wasn't going to come up at the same standards as I did. So she was a rebel. However, I think I've always had a rebel streak in me. As much as I was conforming to all of the rules and the regulations. And there was this particular story which I told a few years ago, I think in a post, but I took, at the age of 14 or 15, I took 10 of my colleagues we were on a school trip, and I took them out in the middle of the night when the teachers were asleep, out of a class of 40. So I was the leader, they followed me, and then we were caught by the teachers, and it was a huge disciplinary action, actually. I was almost expelled, despite of being the highest achiever, the most conforming and well-behaved kid they ever had, for this one particular event. So I probably could think of a few other events in my life, but yes, I can say now with conviction I'm a rebel and a conformist. So I'm a non-conformist and a conformist at the same time. It goes back to that parallel life that I mentioned, my two names. My book talks about the non-conformity and the fact that you do need to learn to be creative and get out of the box of this conformed, rigid places like the corporate world, which is where I grew up effectively. So the tagline of the book is leading with care, courage and non-conformity. In a world that does require conformity, there is a huge value in learning how to navigate that system in a way that serves you and not the system. Most people think I live a conventional life. However, I dare to believe I live an unconventional life in many ways. Although I am a rule maker, I grew up in this system where the rules and regulations were very important. So I value the rules and regulation, and I make the rules even in our own team at Adapter. I also value the quality or the capacity to break those rules when the time is right. And what I mean is, when you care about someone or you care about something so deeply, you don't care about what other people think. And that is the unconventional way of doing things, or the non-conformity. For example, when my son was diagnosed on the autism spectrum, I accepted the diagnosis, but I did not accept the prognosis at the time. They said that he wasn't going to finish secondary school or go to university, and I decided to really go about this in an unconventional way, and had this huge belief that is a unique difference that can be leveraged. And I learned to communicate in different ways. One of the things that was one of the biggest challenges is the fact that my son could not hear the word no, and for a very, very, very long time I could only say the word yes. So you can imagine what a challenging time of our life that was. Fast forward, I learned how to dance almost in that communication together, and not only has he learned to communicate, to self-regulate, I became a much, much better parent and a better leader in that process. I always tell this story that I was the head of trading and execution for this hugely prestigious institution, and I could negotiate with almost anybody. The one person I could not negotiate with was my own son, and therefore learning those skills with him have really equipped me to then have relationships with even the most difficult people today, in terms of the leaders that I work and I communicate with, and I teach them how to communicate. It's been an incredible training ground for me for all of these years. And I am incredibly proud of Dan. I mean, he's probably my biggest testimony. Both of my children are actually my biggest testimony, but he's really me never accepting the prognosis, having that huge belief in him and in the fact that we will be able to together to actually leverage this unique difference. He's not only finished his secondary school, he went on to go to university. He's studying animal science and animal zoo, which was his huge passion. This year He's travelled solo on his own to Thailand to an elephant sanctuary, and he's really doing amazing. He's made me incredibly proud, and yeah, looking forward to the future for him and together. My daughter is an incredible human being. Both of my children have been phenomenal students and teachers for me. My daughter especially has been my biggest teacher and student in compassion and care. And she is very well achieved academically, very proud of her, but she's also this incredible artist. So she is playing guitar, she is also painting, and I always wonder, where is this creativity coming? Because I've always looked at myself as not being the creative, being more the conventional type rather than unconventional type, and I always go back and trace it to my mother, my mum, my Queen Bee, who was this designer, this hugely creative brain, and I am delighted that my daughter is really inheriting some of those creative qualities, and I am hugely proud of her. Funnily enough, when I was a teenager, I became a finalist in the National Championship of Athletics in Romania. I used to do athletics, performance, sprinting. So I was incredibly good at 80 meters and then 100 meters. And I did that throughout my school years from the age of 10 to the age of 16, and at the age of 14 I qualified in the National Championships of Athletics in the 100 meters final, and I came in the 5th place, and that was a huge achievement. I still have that book with my record in it somewhere in my parents' house, and I always say I was a sprinter and I remained a sprinter throughout my life. I put my head to something, that huge drive and determination of achieving something when nothing is impossible, as my pendant would say, and I will go for it, sprint it to get to the finishing line, and celebrate at the end. I was a second year university in Bucharest. I wanted to earn money. I looked for jobs, found this advertising in the newspaper for an interpreter. My English wasn't really that good, but the audacious one in me said, so what? Sod it, went for the interview, got the job, and the next thing I know, I was driving in this guy I did not know, in his car up on the mountains to an orphanage. That's when I met Jean and Dave, the guardian angels, as I call them. They were part of that one English group that came to help the Romanian orphanage at the time. And I've got this story which is so embarrassingly funny, as my English truly wasn't that great. It was a phenomenal opportunity for me to practice it, but I remember taking the English team, there were about 20 of them, and we went for a walk to the village where the orphanage was, and I was telling them the history, a little bit of the history of Romania. They were asking questions, and one of the history is the Turks invading Romania many years ago. The whole Turkish and the Ottoman Empire. And what I said was the Turkeys invaded Romania rather than the Turks. Me thinking, what are they laughing at? And not realizing that my translation for Turks was certainly not the correct one. So I ended up working for Jean and Dave for a couple of years while I was a student in Bucharest. They invited me to the UK to visit them, to thank me for all of the contributions I made to their charity at the time. And as I came to the UK in that September, as a tourist, I went to London, and one of the places that I visited was London Bridge. At the end of London Bridge is this beautiful building, I thought at the time, number 1 London Bridge. And I remember standing in front of that building and looking up and thinking, oh wow, just imagine what it would be to work here one day. And fast forward, I came and studied in the UK, and when I graduated university, I actually ended up working for PricewaterhouseCoopers at the time, and my very first job was exactly that one building, number 1 London Bridge, because that's where they were based at the time. So my first lesson into the power of thought and the power of manifestation. On that same trip, something remarkable happened. I was staying with Jean and Dave for this week in Merseyside, and one Saturday morning, Jean had this brilliant idea to go and visit Liverpool University. She just woke up and said, Alina, let's just go and see if we can get you a place into university. And I remember thinking at the time, this is nuts. This is the most audacious idea that I've heard. But anyway, here we were. We got into the car, Jean and Dave and myself, Saturday morning, walking into the university, and Jean was this incredible woman. I mean, audacious, tiny, but with so much force and the biggest heart. So she goes and asks, where's the admission officer? Where is the admission office? So we were just shown, we go in there, and then I even remember to this day was this guy called David Lister. So she says, we've got this really intelligent, smart girl. Can she come and study here? And I remember the look on his face was like, oh, I mean, who are these people? And she said she even has her exams translated into English, which I did, because it was her idea to translate all of my English, all of my exams into English at the time. So I gave it to him, he looks at them, and I was an A-star student, and she then looks at me and says, this was September, you could, if you wanted to, be a foreign student from this September. And I remember being gobsmacked, looking at him and thinking, wow, what does that mean? And he says, you would be a foreign student, which means you have to pay the fees. And that was well above my what I could ever afford, to be honest. There was like £7,000 at the time. It was impossible. And I remember looking at Jean and saying, this is not going to happen, it's impossible. And she then looks back at him and says, oh, what if we adopt Alina? To which, again, he is shocked by the audacity of this request, and then looks back at me and says, how much do you actually want to study here, Alina? And I said, well, I'd love to. I just don't know how that would be possible. I would never be able to afford the fees. And he says, well, are you in a hurry? And I said, I'm in no hurry. Because I was only going into my 4th year of 5 years of university in Bucharest. And he said, just give me the time and I might be able to get you a scholarship from the European Union. And that was that. I went back home to Romania and haven't even thought about it. And by Christmas, I got a letter from David Lister, who said, I have now been given a scholarship from European Union to study in the UK from the following year, so in the following September. And the remarkable thing is I did not want to give up my university degree in Bucharest, so I ended up doing 2 degrees in one. I came to the UK and I sat my exams in December in Liverpool, and then I went and sat my exams in Bucharest in January, and then I sat my exams in Liverpool in May again, and then I went to Bucharest and sat my exams in June. And here I was, having graduated from Bucharest after the 5 years, and then went on for 2 more and graduated from Liverpool too, and I got my 2 degrees. So that was another, guardian angels, Jean and Dave, a truly remarkable milestone, butterfly moment, as I call them, in life. So when I started with PwC, I was an accountant effectively. I went on to study for another 3 years. I was working and studying at the same time. That's what you need to do to qualify. And in my very final year, I won the first prize for English law exam, for the English law. And remember that only a few years back, my English wasn't really that great, having confused Turks for Turkish. And here I was celebrating a first prize in English law. Eventually I ended up working for an investment bank, and I was made the head of trading and execution. And I had this niggling, cheeky idea that I wanted to spend more time with my children. And it was unheard of, it was just even crazy to think about it. And I mulled and mulled over this idea of how am I going to make it happen. And then one day I just said to myself, Alina, if you don't ask, you don't get. So what have you got to lose? So I took my then boss for lunch, and trying to grab this courage to ask, we went through the starter, the main, and then the dessert, and finally I grabbed this courage and dropped the bomb and asked for a 4-day week, to which he went white and he was shocked. Yet he gave me the possibility to work for 4 days a week. And I remember at the time I was incredibly flexible. I just said I could do any day of the week. I could not inform the market, interestingly, and so we didn't announce it to the market for probably a few months until we tested it. And here I was asking in the middle of a financial crisis to have this hugely responsible job of trading, where I managed to get myself as I'm told, the only person who ever was a managing director at the time, working 4 days a week. And so yeah, very proud of that one moment, which is what I do with my clients today. You don't ask, you don't get. You're never going to know what's on the other side of that request. At the height of my career, there was a family trauma that really created this sharp turn in my personal and professional life. And I remember vividly crying my eyes out on the train, on the bridge, on the way to work, behind these dark sunglasses. And one day I just said to myself, this is just crazy. How am I doing this? Or why am I doing this? And I just got myself back on the train on the way home, and had this moment of realization of like, oh my God, if I can't do it, how am I expecting my family to get through this? So turned back, just got myself back into work and never looked back. So when I talk about silver lining in this particular situation, it's the fact that all of these so-called obstacles, huge milestones in our lives, are there to teach us a lesson. And through that period of trauma, we moved house. We, as a family, actually moved next to a horse riding stable. So that was one of the things that I call the silver lining, because my son went to learn to ride. He then ended up years later at an equine college, and then years later he ended up studying animal science. So through all of that, had that trauma not happened to us, all of these changes and leaps would not have happened. So that's an example of one silver lining. And me setting up my business a few years later was another silver lining, which I talk about in my book. terrible things will happen to most of us throughout our lives, and yet it's acknowledging those moments of difficulty and obstacles and choosing to reframe them into the opportunity that all of those learning moments will give us. And if we again choose to learn the lessons that those particular obstacles have given us, I think there is always something else on the other side that we could use to our benefit. Now, one of my strongest beliefs is that everything is going to be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. Acknowledgement is actually a full chapter in my book. It's one of the early chapters. And it's critical that we acknowledge what I call the great things in our lives, but equally important that we acknowledge the difficult moments in our lives, the obstacles in our lives. Because if we avoid them or we ignore them, they're not going to go away. You put them under the carpet and actually they are going to amplify. So you might as well acknowledge and deal with it. It's almost the foundation of everything else. Acknowledgement, it's where it all starts, because once you acknowledge what it is that you have to deal with, it's a lot easier to then absolutely do it. When you were promoted to a managing director in the reputable institution that I worked for, you were known by your initials. Nobody will talk to you in your name like Alina Addison. And my initials were ADA, Alina Addison. So people would address me by Ada or ADA, except this one person who was working for me or with me. He refused to call me Ada and he called me AAA, which was for anybody who is in the financial services will know that is the highest rating given to either a country or a company, and it's a symbol of creditworthiness, and it's a symbol of trust and trustworthiness, and a country, for example, or a company with a very, very small risk of default. So it was really a status of significance, and I was renamed AAA in my team because of this one person. Now, for that on, when I came to name my own company, and in the original stages, I wanted to play with the AAA, which didn't work, and then I wanted to do the ADA, and I settled for the name Adapta. The name was not available on the registrar, and after months and months of really wanting to settle on this name, I was almost devastated. And I remember being at the dinner table thinking, oh, I'm just going to have to start all over again. Another 3 months of finding a name, and my daughter just said, Mum, why don't you just add another A? And that's how the name of Adapta, with the 2 A's at the end, came about. So I decided to set up Adapta as a leadership development and executive coaching company with a difference. Run by people who are different and they are passionate about making a difference in the world, and making that difference within the inner and the outer world is what I called today audacious leadership, from the inside out. And what's unique about Adapta is this model of sharing and this model of collaboration between these coaches, which are unique in their very own way. They have very different leadership styles and coaching styles, and yet they are very, very aligned and similar in many other ways through the way they share the values. And together, through all of these complementary skills, the proposition, it's much more powerful. It's exponentially more powerful. When I work with my clients on defining their personal brand, I always give them the example of my own brand as an investment banker, which I call Leader 3D. So I was decisive, I was determined, and I was driven. When I came to redefine my brand as an executive coach, I came up with the 3 C's. So as a coach, I'm challenging, I'm committed, and I'm caring. And it was the same principle then that I applied to the Adapter team and our philosophy. So we defined it as the 3 A's: audacious, adaptable, and authentic. And that's one of the missions that we have at Adapter, to really create the leaders of the future who are audacious, adaptable, and authentic. When I started writing my book, I had this silly idea of writing the one book with the most A's in it, because I was obsessed with this triple A and the letter A. And so I proposed it to my Audacious publisher at the time, and they of course thought that was a silly idea, and yet they allowed me to start all of my chapters with an A. So now I have the Audacity Star, which has got 8 A's, and every one of my chapter starts with an A. So there are 8 attributes to the audacious leader. For example, acknowledgement, which is the courage to know and not know. Assertiveness, which is the courage to say no. And authenticity, for example, which is the courage to not care, and so on. The first publisher didn't want to publish this book because of the word audacity, and that's the one thing I felt really passionate about, so I was okay to let that particular big publisher let go. And I believe I redefined the word audacity, because most people think of audacity as a negative word, and yet there is a very positive connotation to this one word that could really change your life if you wanted to embrace it. So yes, audacity means daring. It is daring to do something out of ordinary, and is also, in my opinion, caring. So I added this extra dimension to audacity, which is the caring part. When we care about someone or something so deeply, we will achieve the impossible. We will achieve what many people may believe it's impossible or is possibly unacceptable, and yet it is achievable. That's audacious. I brought my experience from understanding the autism spectrum into this Audacity Spectrum and applied it to the leadership world, in as much as we all have the superpowers, and when we stretch them to the extreme, so we go all the way to that apex, we go into overdrive, those superpowers will become weaknesses. And in the same way as when we avoid most of these attributes, we take it to the other extreme effectively. And there are moments in time when avoiding it is the right strategy. So it's this interplay, it's this dance between these 2 extremes of the spectrum, 2 extremes of the star, and learning how to play in the middle to become the best versions of ourselves. So what's different about this book is that it integrates my professional experience, my personal experience, and also a lot of the practical tools and models that I have found extremely useful in my coaching career. The most used and the simplest and probably the most useful in a way as tools that could help you to become more audacious in your personal and in your professional life. I enjoy one-to-one coaching with both women and men. There are different dynamics, and interestingly, what I say to both of them is that I give my clients courage. That's what they would probably say, and yet it's a different type of courage for them. With men, what I teach them is to open their hearts, which is a huge daring statement, and yet I feel that this is what I give them, which is different from what I give to the women that I work with. The courage I give women is to not to open their hearts, because I think that's an easier process for them, but it's actually to ask for what they want. It's that philosophy: if you don't ask, you don't get. That's one of the key takeaways for women at the end of working with me on a one-to-one basis. And the whole idea of the book is really to teach people how to dance in the middle, how to maybe flex some of the too muchness down and stretch some of the courage to come out of the avoidance circle, and really learn how to play in this sweet zone, or sweet spot as I call it. And I use the dance metaphor because it truly is 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards. It's a constant forward and backwards until you find that equilibrium of what it is that you're trying to achieve. Maybe I am a natural born sprinter, having sprinted all my life. And I love it. I love to run fast. And sometimes I also acknowledge that it may be a bit too fast for the people around me, for the family or for the team. And so I learned to slow down. In the last few years, I've been doing so many different things with the business, with the family, with the hotel, with the book. And I have started to really appreciate the importance of stopping, the importance of reflecting, of integrating, of consolidating, and really slowing down to speed up, as my own coach would say. That's a huge, huge quality that I have learned over the last few years. And the whole learning mindset that there is a road to mastery. No matter how many things we have achieved or we have set out to do, we could always learn in that process. So I am incredibly, incredibly grateful and appreciative for all of the things that I have achieved, for all of the amazing moments in my life, as well as all of those obstacles, those milestones that I now believe that have been the made and the making, and some people say the breaking of who we are today. And I want to end up on this appreciation note. And that is the title of my last chapter of the book, Appreciation.